Ho, ho, ho.
Intro?
Merry Chrysler, it's the 1st of December, so Christmas time, officially, kind of, mostly. And I'm going to be kicking off this month by reviewing the weirdest product that I have in my Audible library. I've been a customer of Audible. By the way, this video is not sponsored, but if I ever get a sponsor, Audible would make the most sense. I've been a customer since 2016, so I've been through many different price changes and benefit changes and stuff like that. And for a time, I think about a year, there was this thing where every Audible member, so a person who pays subscription, got to choose 2 audiobooks from a selection of 6. Now, in general, the Audible was calling itself a service full of audiobooks for the longest time, but around that period it switched to spoken word entertainment, which is good because the thing that I'm going to be talking about, an audiobook is not. It's something else entirely. Anyhow, this benefit was kind of not really popular. People didn't really like it because it's not really possible to fulfill everyone's needs with a selection of 6 titles. Just not everyone will be able to find something among these 6 things. There usually was 1 for kids, 1 crime book, and 4 completely random ones. So I have 20 or so books that I have not listened to yet. Harry Clark was one of them, and I've been listening to these books lately to put a dent in the unlistened, unopened audiobooks in my library. So Harry Clark is a single person drama piece. It's advertised as a performance by Billy Crudup. If you speak French and Polish, his name is very funny. But even just that is misleading. Spoilers for the whole thing, because I cannot even tell you what it is without spoiling stuff. It's completely misleading. It's advertised as a drama performance by Billy Crudup, thriller to be exact, where Harry Clark kind of weaves his way into the life of a rich family, implication to swindle them out of their money. But it is so much more than that. First of all, I started listening to the book, and after an hour, the performance ended. The Harry Clark itself, in the product called Harry Clark, is actually just about an hour. And after that, chapter number 2 started with David Cale introducing himself performing Lillian, his other drama, which was completely not, told to me by any point. Lillian ended and I had still 2 hours to go. The last 2 hours are 2 different interviews with David Cale. So I'm going to start with reviewing the complexities of Harry Clark as a part, then move on to Lillian, and then I think just look at the product as a whole, and I'm going to interpret it as if it was a creation that I was supposed to listen to in its entirety, as a curated product, as a single auditory experience, because it's so weird. So I'll start with this one random review, which I stumbled upon while checking out in general the reviews, because I wanted to see what people thought about the book. I think the rating for Harry Clark is at 3.5 stars. Puszczamy. 3.5 stars, which is actually rather low. I'd say around 4 stars is average. So 3.5, or I think it's even lower, is really, really low. And I think it comes down to that deception. So, as I said, Harry Clark was advertised as a drama performance thriller, but this Austin person reviewed it so. Story is about a gay guy, 1 star. Good thing it was free, but if the summary would have stated it was a gay love story, wouldn't have wasted my free original for the month. So unhappy with this. 8 people found this helpful, one of them me, by accident, but I'm not that mad that I clicked it, because I think that this is much closer to what this performance actually is about than the thriller summary. It's just not a thriller. It lacks any sort of intrigue, drama. There is not even that ploy to con a rich family out of their money, which was promised in the summary. What it is a story about Philip Brogelstein, a man who from his childhood felt a compulsion to speak an English accent, and this English accent at some point in his life turned out to be some kind of persona, which was not named so by Philip, but kind of came equipped with the name Harry Clark. Harry Clark is a part of Philip Brogelstein. So, is it a gay love story? Not just, and also not at all. I think we'll put a pin in that gay aspect because it is quite more complicated than it would seem. It's not very obvious what Harry's sexuality is, and I will talk about it a little bit later. First of all, I will sum up this story. So, Philip is born in Iowa to his parents, a single child. They die when he's a teenager still, and then he moves to New York, where after testing people's reaction to him being from Iowa and speaking with an English accent, and the reaction is negative, generally speaking, obviously because it's just outside of the norm, he decides to pretend that he, Philip, working as a bartender, is actually from London. One day he feels a compulsion to follow a guy who will name Mark. I'm fairly certain his name is Mark. He's the rich guy, a guy from this rich family. Follows him around and learns that he is engaged to a woman named Susan, I think. And then one day stumbles upon him in a theater and decides to strike up a conversation and pretends that they were introduced to each other by his fiancée. He takes up this Harry persona, introduces himself as Harry, and Harry is way more flamboyant, charming, loud, boisterous than Philip is, so it's very easy for him to seduce, and I know about the romantic connotations of the word, but I would say that it is a very apt word for how he charms Mark. They kind of struck up a very quick, fast-paced friendship. Theft. And Mark invites him on his parents' boat, where he meets Mark's sister and Mark's parents. He pretends to have been Sade's, the singer manager, for multiple years, who freshly quit and is trying to find his footing in the US. He strikes up a friendship mostly with the mother and the sister, less so with the dad. Their parents have to leave a little bit earlier. And Harry spends a passionate night with Mark on a boat. After their meeting and the night together, Mark seems to go back into the closet, into denial. He has some sorts of regrets. And Philip puts Harry back in the closet and just lives his life for a little while. He meets Mark's sister, who invites him to her concert, Kirusia, and Harry proposes a romance. The sister is in a relationship, and she saves his number and says that she will keep it for when she's in need of appreciation. He later reconciles with Mark, who turns out to have been a gay man in the closet. They are together. Mark is spiraling in drug addiction. He then meets with Mark's sister, sleeps with her, but it's a very positive relationship in the sense that she feels very nice and validated by the encounter. He keeps on being with Mark. Mark hurts him by throwing something at him. He then meets with Mark's mother, who is now a widow. She has sexual relationship with her, goes back to Mark for a while, breaks up with him. Mark's leave him all of his money. The sister figures out that they were lovers, slaps him, and then Harry moves to Fiji. That's it. That's a pretty complicated story, isn't it? But in general, what we're focused on within the play is Harry's or Philip's reasoning. There are moments where Philip and Harry are very much distinctly in a dialogue with each other, but I think it was more so a literary device to show his internal conflict than actually it being two, she's trying to steal the bear, than it being two split personalities. And that's why I'm saying that the question of Harry's sexuality is a bit more complicated than just being gay. I don't believe that, okay, just being gay, pin in that. In the later interviews, there's no implication, no question of Harry being intended to be a character with some sort of to be a character with some sort of personality disorder. However, I believe that this is one of the points in which some degree of depth of the author can be implemented, because if a character manages to fit some sort of criteria, behavioral criteria for a disorder, I think it's just showcasing that the author had wonderful observational skills and accidentally managed to write a character who fits a certain type of diagnosis rather well. And I think it's what happened here. First of all, disclaimer, I am just a psychology student and I'm not saying 100% it is what it is, but I wanted to just mention some sort of possible explanations for this behavior, for this sort of behavior. And clearly Harry is not fine if he felt the need to be somebody else since childhood. And his erratic behavior, his inability to have long relationships, his relationships being very quick to fizzle out and very intense, him putting on a persona and having... Why are you... So, I don't know if I stated it already, but I think he fits certain criteria for borderline personality disorder. And that's where the questionability of his sexual orientation comes into question, because people with borderline, sexuality is valid and adult people have the right to choose their sexual partners. In general, people with borderline personality disorder can be drawn to a specific type of person and can be drawn to portray themselves in a specific type of way, where deciding what their sexuality is for themselves or explaining it to others, and even the question of gender identity, can be a little bit more complicated, because when you have a tendency to be so volatile, and again, disclaimer, it's just a possibility in some cases. For example, if say somebody who was born a woman is really, really drawn to certain parts of the male experience and male gender expression, she can be really drawn and want to live a life that way, at least partially, but it's not that she's actually transgender. She is questioning her gender, but it's not who she is. It's just more difficult to be certain about the origins of what you feel and who you really are. Part of it can be ascribed to the lacks in, there's this process called in Polish mentalizacja, which is in general a clear comprehension, a clear understanding of the deeper thought processes behind your actions and actions of other people. And people with borderline personality disorders have severe lacks in this department. That's part of what makes empathy, for example, more difficult to them. So that's one of the possibilities, that his relationships with multiple people can be really explained away as a facet of his borderline personality disorder. Moreover, because we are in his head, so we can see that in every time he has sex, it's not about how much sexual attractions he feel towards these people. He is playing a role. He is trying to read that person, and it's intriguing to me because it seems to me that he doesn't really understand the complicated thought processes behind the actions of the people he's trying to seduce. But because he's so charming, it turns out all right temporarily. So he seduces the people in the way that they will be most receptive of, and it's at least partially an accident, because sometimes charm is not enough if you don't have the understanding of the context clues, social cues, and their general life situation. But it just turns out well for him. I found this character really interesting, and I thought that it was a very interesting, a brilliant piece of theater. So 5 stars for this part. I'll also mention that there are other possible diagnoses you can give Harry. One of them being, for example, unspecified impulse control disorder, where people feel the itch to do a taboo or a wrong thing. Then by doing this thing, they feel a temporary relief. Anytime Philip pretends to be Harry, he feels a relief, or so he likes himself more as the flamboyant Harry. But I felt that borderline fit the criteria more. However, as I said, it's a fictional character. We only know him for an hour. To build a true profile, we would have to spend way more time with him. And then we go into chapter number 2, which is Lillian, a performance by David Cale. It's very easy to suspend your disbelief that David is Lillian. And it's funny because David himself later in later chapters says that he was not aware how similar Lillian and Harry were and their circumstances. Harry is 30 something, I think, between 20 something and 30 something in his show. Lillian is a middle-aged woman who cheats on her husband with a young guy named Jimmy, who she then meets years later. And I really like how complex of a character she is. Kira is looking at the bear and she wants to steal it once again. I really love how wonderfully complex she is as a character, because she is not a bad person. She does a bad thing by cheating on her husband. 100% hurts, but it's intriguing because we really stay with her. She knows she hurt her husband, but she felt compelled to be with Jimmy. In general, we get the appearance that Lillian has not been happy for a very long time, maybe since ever, and Jimmy is kind of the catalyst for her to wake up and take some kind of control over her life in a passive way, I'd say, because she has an external comprehension of control. She feels that the motivation and control over her life comes from the outside, so she needed the external factor of Jimmy to take control of her life. She wouldn't have been able to do it by herself. And then she divorces her husband, which she was forced to do because her husband knew her well. By choosing to sleep with Jimmy, she actively made the choice to divorce her husband. He was very clear before and said that her cheating would break him and he would not be able to be with her ever again. And that's what he does. They break up, they divorce. She moves to Brighton. I don't know whether it's in the United States or in England. The first one was American. This one is, I think, in England, where she works in a bookstore and re-meets Jimmy, who is now married, and they have a fling once again. And then she seems to be the catalyst for him to leave his wife, who tries to control Jimmy very much. She overhauled his whole life. She's in control of the way he speaks, what he eats, what kind of exercise he does, what kind of pets he doesn't keep. He didn't keep his lizards anymore and made him get rid of his truck. So now she is the catalyst for him to leave his wife. And then they finally get together, are together for a long time. Jimmy leaves her with a flower shop that she opened because it seemed to be his dream, but she decides to commit to it. To commit to it, makes this life her own, and is finally happy. Then it turns out, of course, because the drama, that Jimmy was terminally ill, died, and stuff. This show, I think, its themes would be, of course, the life of Lillian and Jimmy, but I think more than anything else, how sometimes we need other people to make the decisions, in the sense that we don't take responsibility for our own lives, some of us don't, and how life would be if we placed the control over our own life elsewhere. It's de facto Jimmy who has control over Lillian's life, and who is responsible for her finally having the life that she enjoys as a flower store owner. So as a part of the larger whole, it's, again, there are the themes of control. Like in Harry Clark, it was the lack of impulse control. Here it is kind of so as well, but the catalyst for change is Jimmy. Then we move on to chapters number 3 and 4, which I'm going to consider in the larger context of the whole product. So Harry, Lillian, then an interview with David Cale about these two pieces of work, and then an interview, a moderated discussion with David, Harry, the conversation leader, the interviewer, and also the audience. And I'm going to over-interpret it here because that's what they want me to do. This is part of the creation. So what does it mean that first we had David as Billy, as Harry, as Philip, then we had David as Lillian, and then we have David as himself. But we had these themes of deception and control. So what does it mean that David is now speaking for himself, but speaking about how he influenced and exercised the biggest amount of control that he's able to by creating two lives and creating two characters. Now, David exists in the same universe as Lillian and as Philip, Harry, Billy, David. So in this whole theatrical universe, they share the same plane of existence. Lillian and Harry coexist with their maker in the same astral plane. Does it mean that they can interact with each other? Does it mean that David, by appearing in this piece of content, actually reaffirms that the control is placed on the outside? And in general, you don't really have control. You don't need to have control over your impulses because they are put there by somebody else, and you don't need to make decisions for your life because if some decision needs to be made, then he, the God, will implement a character which then will force you to make the right decision. Is that what this show is about? And then we move on to chapter number 4, where Billy, the actor, and David are being interviewed. So now we have another interviewer, who I would say that in the chapter where it's just David and interviewer is just a character which streamlines David's thought processes. But in the 4th chapter, when the audience is brought in, then we are brought in. David actually puts us in the same theatrical universe. I am able to meet Harry Clark, and any decision that I make is influenced by God, by David. So actually, the themes of control are now being implemented into our daily life, and the message is clear, because we should just go with the flow. And if our internal impulses don't come from ourselves actually, and our external motivators don't, then actually it's just fate. We don't really have any kind of control over our own lives, which is very much in theme with the Greek drama idea of fate. Like in King Oedipus, Fate is inescapable. Things that are about to happen will happen no matter what we do. Some things are unavoidable. So what we're supposed to do is do whatever we want, because whatever we want is the thing that is supposed to happen and to do. If we hurt, it's meant to be. If we're happy, it's meant to be. And also, by putting audience in the 4th chapter of Harry Clark, which is actually a discussion with the audience mentioned set decorations and paintings and stuff like that, which furthermore just blurs the relationship between the creation and the real world, because we as the listeners cannot really see anything. So are we meant to imagine it? Are we just meant to understand that it's happening in a room that we're not currently in but would have an access to? Because clearly that Harry happened in front of the audience. So we are the audience as well. We are the audience as well. And with that, I think I'll wrap it up with this terrible conclusion that we are actually all just figments of David's imagination. With that, I'll give the Harry and Lillian bits 5 stars. I also finished a book called Killer by Nature, which I would give 2 stars to. Andrew, who was disappointed about gay guys, give this book 5 stars. I disagree, because this book's psychological concepts seem very antiquated. Also, the performances were bad because the characters did not really have a lot of distinctive voices. It was very difficult to differentiate between them, and they were not very compelling. So I thought I mentioned that. If you like this video, consider subscribing, liking, maybe supporting me. All relevant links are in the description box. And I'll bring Kira over so that you can see her face and say bye-bye. And I say bye-bye to you. Oh, before I go, look, I got an advent calendar, which are just different types of teas. I love it. Mary Chrysler. Okay. So that's it. That's all there is to it. This is my weasel. Consider support next. Give us money. Good December and bye-bye.